Hi, you guys. Welcome back to C Squad Cinema, a compendium for physical media, film reviews, rambles, and other nerdy movie talk. Today, we're talking about M. Night Shyamalan, and specifically, we're going to talk about his latest, Trap, on 4K. So, in starting a conversation about M. Night Shyamalan, I don't really know where to begin. He's a pretty divisive writer-director at this point. Depending on who you ask, he's either one of the worst directors in Hollywood working, or he's like a modern-day Hitchcock. And I have to be honest, I fall kind of in the latter camp. I think he is one of the best writer-directors working today, or at least one of the most interesting. And there's some caveat to that. I will say that the early Shyamalan era, as in the late 90s, early 2000s, I think is some of the most profound modern cinema. I mean, there's no denying the impact of The Sixth Sense when it came out. That is what made his name. He had a feature film before The Sixth Sense that did well on the independent circuit, but The Sixth Sense hit theaters and blew up. It became a sensation, and for obvious reasons. I mean, even now, when you know the twist of that film, it's still a really compelling watch, if nothing else, because you have Bruce Willis putting in some really good work in his role. And then you had child actor at the time, Haley Joel Osment, just being completely committed to what is, in effect, a very difficult role. And by now, unless you've been under a rock or were literally just born yesterday, I'm sure you're all familiar with the twist of The Sixth Sense and what made it such a compelling movie. You know, it's not just a surface level horror thriller about a kid that sees ghosts. It's a story about a family. You know, there's a mom played by Toni Collette putting in some of her career best work as a single mother to Haley Joel Osment's character. It's a movie about communication and the importance of saying things that should be said and the tragic consequence of not saying things that you need to say when you still have time to say them. And I think M. Night Shyamalan wrote a really good script. You know, there's some scenes in that movie that still make me cry to this day. It is hard to watch Toni Collette in that scene toward the end of the film in the car when Cole is telling her things about her mother. And her reaction is just, it is next level performance. It's Oscar worthy material, honestly. And I think it's just one of the better screenplays of that era. Not to mention, the film is beautifully shot. You know, M. Night's use of the color red in that film against some of the more muted, like almost sepia tones that saturate everything else. Really unique way to kind of cue and hint to your audience that the color red is being associated with something. And that kind of thematic resonance is something that Hitchcock did. So I think it invites the comparison to one of the greatest filmmakers in history. Hitchcock himself was a controversial figure. And while M. Night Shyamalan has not risen up to that level of controversy, thankfully, it just becomes a question of, is he a consistently good writer-director? Well, yes, he is. And for me, all the way up through The Visit, I've loved just about every single one of his movies. In fact, one of the most divisive ones of the early M. Night Shyamalan era was The Village. The Village is my favorite M. Night Shyamalan movie. I just think it's a really beautiful story. You know, it's elevated really well by Bryce Dallas Howard, who that was her first performance in a movie, period. And I think she did a really great job. Bottom line is, M. Night Shyamalan is a storyteller. You know, one thing I've noticed in recent years, going back and revisiting all of his filmography, is that every film from M. Night Shyamalan encapsulates some form of family. You know, in The Sixth Sense, you have a single mom and her son. And then in Unbreakable, you have a broken family, you know, a married couple that's possibly separating, maybe on their way to divorce, and they have a child as well. You know, and then in Signs, you have a single dad trying his best to raise his kids on a farm with a little help from his brother. The Village, obviously comprised of a lot of families. And then Lady in the Water, which I think is really underrated. I think M. Night Shyamalan told a really unique kind of fairy tale, and it was even marketed as like a bedtime story. Now, I think that is the film where people could start to look at that and go, well, he's kind of writing this very self-serving script. He plays the character that's like the author that's, apparently the savior of the world because of the stories that he writes. And is it a little bit of self-importance? I don't think so. I think it's just M. Night Shyamalan having fun with a role. Then we go on to the first real black sheep of M. Night Shyamalan's movies, The Happening. I seem to remember when it first came out, it was getting some good reviews because there was even some portion of the audience that did not like Signs. But The Happening really divided people. And I think it was because some of the delivery of the performances in that film. I think that Mark Wahlberg brought a really specific tonality to that movie. And, Zooey Deschanel is always quirky anyway. So I think that was intentional in their performance. And story-wise, I didn't have an issue with The Happening at all. I thought it was a really crazy cool idea that the biology of the planet would be taking revenge on us. I didn't see it as just, ooh, the wind is going to get you. I thought it was like, hey, plants are now dispersing this chemical that's making humans win the Darwin Award every 15 seconds. I thought it was a terrifying movie, actually. And I really liked it. Then after The Happening came The Visit, which was, his take on a found footage horror movie. And it is probably the most conventional horror movie in all of the movies he's done, but I still got some enjoyment out of it. So ironically, it's been his last 3 feature films that I'm not the biggest fan of. And I never thought I'd be at a point where I was saying that, because I found a strength in each of his films. They were all unique. They all offered something different while still utilizing, some form of family to tell a really compelling story. The first misfire for me was Old. I remember seeing the trailer for Old and kind of being excited by the idea, but there was something in its execution that just felt sort of made for TV. And I don't know if that was in the performances or the writing took a backseat. Something about it didn't gel for me. And I just wasn't as compelled by the execution. And then we had Knock at the Cabin, which tells a story about this impending global apocalypse, but it's told through the lens of this very intimate story that takes place at a cabin in the woods. Almost the entire feature takes place in one location. And there were elements of that film that I really liked. I actually really liked the family dynamic, these 2 dads that have adopted their daughter and they're just trying to vacation at a little family cabin in the woods. I think what doesn't work for me is Dave Bautista's presence. There's just something that I think off-kilters the movie. Not to say that he's a terrible actor, but because his character has to carry so much of Knock at the Cabin, I just don't think he has the chops that role required. And it just didn't work for me. And there's really no twist, so to speak. Not that there needs to be. And I think that becomes a common criticism of M. Night Shyamalan, is people always expect that there is a twist. He's not a one-trick pony. So now that I'm done with that little side tangent about all of his movies, we come to Trap. When I saw the first trailer for Trap, I got pretty excited because I didn't love the last few things that he did. I was looking forward to this, but then the reviews started to come out. And again, depending on which one you read, it was either one of the better films he had directed in a while, or it was this steaming pile of garbage. Well, I'll say this. It's certainly not lacking of ideas. Just like all of his stories, I think that the seeds of the story are really cool and really unique. And actually, if you watch the special features, it's kind of cool how he came up with the concept for the film. He and his daughter had gone to see The Purple Rain, the concert film about Prince. And the 2 of them had a conversation. Well, what if we did a movie that was a thriller that took place at a concert? Not in and of itself a bad idea. But again, I think where this one went wrong is in the execution. Now, I'll hand it to M. Night Shyamalan. He's clearly somebody who values and loves his family. and has done a really good job of supporting his daughters who are seemingly following in his footsteps. His daughter, Shyamalan, directed The Watchers this year. And then in Trap, he has another one of his daughters, Salika Shyamalan, who plays the pop star Lady Raven. Now, the concert angle of the story was basically all in the trailers. You know, you've got Josh Hartnett playing this guy who takes his teenage daughter to the Lady Raven concert, and pretty soon we find out, well, the place is being swarmed by police who are looking for the Butcher, a serial killer who they have reason to believe is going to be at the concert. And yes, Josh Hartnett's character is the Butcher, and this whole concert has been set up to trap him. But not really, though. I mean, the concert was going to happen, and actually a specific point of the story is that when they gain intel that the Butcher's going to be at the concert, they come up with this game plan to trap him and find him. Now, that idea, just in and of itself, could potentially work. I happen to work in law enforcement. I know that when you receive intel about a suspect being at a specific place at a specific time, you can make certain moves to apprehend them and take them into custody, but not in the shenanigans way that they depict in this film. You know, one of my biggest pet peeves is often the way that law enforcement is portrayed in film. I think when law enforcement is portrayed really ineptly in motion pictures, it does have an influence on the public's perception of how law enforcement actually functions. And let me tell you, folks, this ain't it. Basically, the police and all their SWAT teams and everybody surrounds this whole place, you know, starts blocking exits. They're not letting people leave until they check every mail that fits the possible description of this Butcher guy. And they have a variety of descriptions based on some evidence of at one of the crime scenes. So, is it an entertaining concept? Sure it is. It's a lot of fun to watch Josh Hartnett walk around and try to come up with ways that he can escape this concert venue. And his performance is pretty fun. I think he brings a lot of energy to this role. I think he's clearly having fun playing a bad guy. Then there's a development in the story when he does eventually escape the concert venue. Essentially, the pop star character has to take a pretty prominent role in the film. And I think that's where it goes wrong. I think the character's role within the story is a little bit absurd. I think it goes way too far for too long. And there's a whole middle stretch of the movie that I'm not buying it. And I think it pulls the audience right out of the feature because it just asks a lot of you. I'm a big fan of having to suspend my disbelief to watch a movie. But when a movie is trying to portray itself in this somewhat grounded world, and then you give the characters these things to do that make very little sense, it kind of just deflates the tension. And unfortunately, it deflates it for a little too long. So by the time the third act rolls around, it gains a little bit of momentum back, but not enough to recover from the flat middle part of the movie. And that's disappointing because I think it takes away some of the rewatch value that a lot of his other films have. I could watch The Village easily twice a year. Trap is not going to be one of those. And I can appreciate it because it came from his heart. You know, he's giving his daughter this role and writing a movie kind of around her ability to sing. And let me tell you, she can sing quite well. And the whole concert atmosphere, absolutely believable. That portion of the movie is really well done. It's everything that comes after that doesn't quite work. It's worth watching. I think Josh Hartnett's performance is a lot of fun. And Trap starts in a really effectively entertaining way. But eventually, the tension is just deflated too much. And ultimately, I can see why this one didn't really do better in the theater. So I think it's competently shot. You know, this is an example of technically good filmmaking. It's just, story-wise, it just wasn't for me. So, you know, now we've got this 4K, and this release has just the 4K disc. The technical merits of this 4K release are really good. It's got Dolby Atmos. It's got Dolby Vision. So it's really strong picture. It's really strong sound. And if you're a fan of M. Night Shyamalan, the way I am, this might be worth picking up. So there you have it. There's Trap by M. Night Shyamalan on 4K. That's all I got for you for now. This has been C Squad Cinema, and I'll see you next time.